Thank you very much. Thank you all very, very much for this opportunity to speak to all of you. Very, very interesting times, as you know. I must admit that 10 years ago, when we separated from Hewlett-Packard, to be standing here today as CEO and having to manage through two of the worst economic downturns in history would never, ever have happened. But the reality is that we've had a very turbulent last 10 years as a company, as a country, and I believe that there are enormous changes ahead that companies such as ourselves, a public company, universities, government are going to have to deal with as we move on to the rest of this decade. Tonight, what I'd like to do, or excuse me, this morning, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about Agilent, just to talk a little bit about what we're doing, how we're looking at the megatrends that we're seeing moving out into the future, and then secondly, to talk a little bit about how we think of value creation as an American company, value creation as a multi-international company that in fact does 70% of its business outside of the United States. So Agilent last year in 2009, and we end our fiscal year on October 31st, we were about $4.5 billion company. This was after we suffered a $1.3 billion loss of revenue from 2008. Needless to say, when there is a credit crisis, people don't spend money on capital equipment. We're essentially a capital equipment company making measurement tools for scientists, researchers around the world. 16,000 employees and in fact do business in 110 countries and have a market cap of about $12 billion. And for many of you, even though our name is different, Hewlett-Packard started as a measurement company. When they came out of Stanford and started a company in 1939, it was 100% focused on measurement science. The company today is organized into three business groups. The core business was electronic measurement that did start, as I said, in 1939. That continues to be the largest part of our business. And, but in about 35 years ago, Hewlett-Packard personally made the decision that if we can measure photons and electrons, let's measure chemical properties. And that's how we entered into the chemical business. And about 7 years ago, we moved into the life science market to be able to apply the breadth of our technology to measurement science in life science, particularly for-profit and academic and research moving forward. This slide does not include the Varian acquisition. I can't tell you how excited we are to be able to combine Varian with Agilent. Varian is a 67-year-old company. Many of you know the Varian brothers came out of Stanford as well. And what makes any integration of two companies so successful is the culture. And we're very, very fortunate that the culture at Varian is very, very similar to that of Agilent. And we believe when we get the final regulatory approval, we'll really be able to put these companies together quite easily, focusing on the customer. And for the first time in our history, our analytical, chemical business, life science business will be bigger than the original electronic measurement business from 1939. So it's a huge transformation of the company. I remember when I became CEO in 2005, I told the board of directors that we were known as a diversified technology company, we were known as a semiconductor company, and that in reality we need to focus on measurement science and to focus on the biggest market, which was life science. Life science tool market's $18 billion. And so we started off in 2005 by divesting 40% of the company. We've created two great companies, Avago and Verigy, but it's always somewhat disconcerting for employees that all of a sudden you make this large company into a much smaller company to make it bigger as we move forward. But that decision in 2005 and the implementation that we have made, I believe had been the right, absolutely right thing to be able to focus this company on measurement science, which was its core competence moving forward. And I can remember in 2005, we would go to Wall Street or we would go to Boston and talk about the company. You couldn't find a life science analyst that would be interested inside of, interested in Agilent. And 3 weeks ago in New York City, 50% of the audience came from the healthcare industry. So that's the type of transformation the company is making, and I believe one that puts us in a unique position because we can bring engineering, physics, chemistry, and biology to problems that are going to face us in the future. Just briefly, what do we make? We make big, complicated, and expensive instruments. There are 7 instruments that basically do the vast majority of the measurement and testing in the world. And again, not to go into the technology between spectrum analyzers and source or gas or liquid chromatography or spectrometry, basically what we do is take the physical world and convert it into the digital domain so a scientist and research can visualize data, visualize what they're working on, visualizing the insights in terms of measurement. Measurement's the core for any type of discovery. Eventually that will get into products, be commercialized, there's compliance, there's manufacturing, but the core of our business is really working with the scientists and researchers, such as here, to really be able to understand and to see what they are trying to do. And obviously in the world of molecular biology, it is just, we're just at its infancy to be able to provide the tools to be able to visualize what's going on down at the molecular level. And so as a result of that, we are able to address the various markets. Half the cell phones in your room, half the cell phones in this room, we've tested. The base stations that you communicate with your cell phones, again, we provide the technology for design and manufacturing and installation. Any of you that watch CSI, half the shows are our equipment in the back. When they say GCMS and that, and they do these tests in about 10 seconds that actually don't take 10 seconds, they take longer. We do 80% of the doping testing at the Olympics. And of course, from the pill factory to ensure the pill that you take has the right composition, to working with researchers to really understand genes, proteomics, metabolomics. We're the ones that provide those types of measurement tools. So given that, and given that measurement is really at the core of discovery, what we do is what are the megatrends moving forward? This is a conversation I know that you have in the school, that you have in each of your businesses, but what are those megatrends that we see in the future? And there are a lot of them, but it's very important for us because if you look at our 70-year history, that there are waves of technology. And it can be moving from vacuum tubes to transistors, going to the wireless environment, a dramatic change. Many of you, some of you in this room are too young, can remember the first wireless phones were big bricks that were amazing that people actually carried around. And soon, they'll be smaller and smaller, and then you lose them. But nonetheless, the change in technology, the change in medicine has just been dramatic over the last 50 years. I used to joke, 100 years ago, people thought they got sick because they did something wrong. I mean, that's how the infancy is of trying to understand the understanding of disease and the curing of the disease. And I must share with you, the older I get, the more excited I get about the understanding of disease and the addressing and extending life. In fact, and not to put a plug in for MIT, but Rick Young of MIT talks about, he's a big stem cell advocate, talks about that death is a curable disease. Unfortunately, I'm too far in my life to get the benefit of this, but can you imagine living 250 years, and I would be up here 190 years from now giving the same talk. So, but let me talk about 3 emerging trends from our perspective and talk about what Agilent's doing to address that. The biggest one's the emergence of Asia. We've been talking about this for the last decade. The emergence of China is the biggest economic disruption to the United States since World War II. This is a big, big deal. There's no doubt about it. Now, the speculation right now, the latest forecast is by 2040, that China will be larger than the United States as an economic power. Huge, huge impact. India continues to emerge. I personally believe that India is the wild card. They have a middle management. They have the ability to manage global companies. China really hasn't demonstrated that. There's a few exceptions. But nonetheless, the story of this century will continue to be Asia moving forward. And the industrialization of Asia has just been dramatic. As you can see, just a fraction of the time that it has taken the West to industrialize over the last 150 plus years. And so from an Agilent perspective, what do you do to capitalize on this? And we're very fortunate that Packard was the first high-tech company to sign a joint venture in China. So we have been there in the 80s. I was the last American that ran our Singapore components operation for Hewlett Packard out of Singapore. And our whole focus in Asia is to look Asian. And if you look at it, 36% of our revenue now is in Asia, 34% of the R&D, 45% of the manufacturing, 42% of the sales and marketing. And so we're already ahead of the curve to make sure that we have in place to be able to not only from our base from the 60s in Japan, our base in China in the 80s, Southeast Asia in the 70s, is to make sure that we in fact look as local as we can with local management to move forward. We have very, very few expatriates. Our country manager in China just was a Chinese American, now has been replaced with a local Chinese citizen to be able to manage our sites. Our ability to hire and to and put an infrastructure in place to be able to design for products specifically for China, and ultimately these products always go around the world. The U.S. is still by far the biggest market. Our ability to protect our flanks in China. We will have competitors coming out of China. They will figure out how to be able to compete on a global environment. We have, in fact, put in big centers in Shanghai in the analytical space. We have bought companies in China to be able to compete locally to make sure that we can protect our flank as people get more and more access to measurement technology. But this is a big, big deal, huge ramifications for the United States. We're hiring like crazy. We're not hiring in the U.S. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. The skill sets required to manage overseas is so much different than what is traditionally taught, the typical experience that you see. And I've been very, very fortunate of having an overseas experience, but it is so important that people understand the culture, understand what it's like to be able to do business without compromising our integrity, without obviously breaking any laws or regulations inside the United States, but to create an environment that is in fact consistent to how we nurture employees anywhere else in the world. So again, huge trend, huge investment for the company. And to give you some indication, our last quarter that ended on January 31st, our business in China grew 30% year over year, even in a very difficult economic environment. The second one, of course, is all about food safety. You read about it all the time. Only 1.5% of food in the United States is tested. Had the opportunity to meet with the FDA yesterday in this area. Americans want to have fresh vegetables on their plate 365 days a year. That means the globalization of the food supply will in fact result in continued foodborne illnesses. Again, 7 million cases in the United States alone. This whole issue of food authenticity. How many of you had fish last night? How did you know that you got what you thought you ordered? Big deal. You don't even think about it. Now we're doing DNA testing on fish. Isn't it amazing? We talked to the FDA about that. Isn't it amazing, this whole food authenticity, speciation of what you're eating, pesticides, the problems of simple things. As we age and, of course, take drugs, those drugs go somewhere, right? They go down into the soil, into the water supply. You can, in fact, go out and measure some of the water supply that we drink, and you will find very, very low concentrations of the various drugs that we all take. So there's a huge issue moving forward. And for us, this is an area where we allocate the resources to ensure that we have these measurement solutions to be able to address that. Not only in the central labs, for example, the FDA, but how in fact do we ensure that there is safety out where the food is being produced. Issues in China like melamine, and again, basically what happened is infant milk was diluted with water to save money. Melamine is a chemical put into the infant milk to be able to cheat the protein test. And bad news. If melamine was bad for dogs, and remember the dog pet food scandal for a few years ago, it is really bad for infants. And those are the type of areas going in, be able to help a country like China to be able to put the infrastructure in place to really understand where along their whole food supply chain these types of events are happening. And obviously there's a real legal issue on top of that, which is their responsibility. But those are the type of things that we're doing in India and China, as well as in the US, Europe, and Japan. And the third one I'll talk about is life science. I joked about the idea of living to 250 years, and someday that will happen. But just in the area of infectious disease and globalization continues to be a big deal. From SARS, from swine flu, there is just enormous issues that we as a country, we as a society, a global society, are going to deal with. Again, it's already the second leading cause of death. It's one of the leading causes for people under 50 years old. And again, a lot of these viruses are attacking younger people, where typically they've attacked older people. And this is an issue that is going to, I think, will be front and center. How do countries respond to this in terms of quarantine? And governments, I think, want to do something. And most of the people You know, quarantining people actually doesn't do much for this. It's so hard to stop. But ultimately is how quickly can you identify the virus, the bacteria, how quickly can you understand the genomic makeup, how quickly can you develop a vaccine to be able to address these issues. So if you look at just 3 of multiple megatrends, there's just enormous opportunity, and one that I think that we as a country, we as a part of the corporate environment in America need to be able to focus. There's a lot of debate in the U.S. about what to do, and unfortunately, and again, this is my opinion, not that of Agilent, the debate's about the wrong thing. The debate is about the future, not the past. And I'll just pick on the comment of manufacturing. Manufacturing will not exit the U.S. totally, but the beginning part of this decade, it's about 25% of the economy. Today it's down to 18%. Another 10 years will be down 10 or 12%. Manufacturing will not come back to the United States unless there's some huge political, economic disruption. Will not do that. That is not the future. And I tell that our employees. I've been very, very aggressive. I showed you we have 45% of our manufacturing is in Asia, closest to the customer. You want to be able to differentiate yourself in manufacturing, which in fact includes low-cost countries that are highly educated, favorable tax situations, because it allows you then to invest in the marketing, the R&D, because that's what's going to differentiate us. And that is what is going to differentiate us competing moving forward. So as a result of that, there's 3 themes for battlegrounds of differentiation that we focus on a company. These aren't new to you, but I'd like to spend a few moments to talk about them because we're very passionate about that. And I believe as a country, as a company that has to compete globally, if these issues aren't addressed, the standard of living in the United States will in fact continue to decline. And so people like me, it hasn't, obviously. I mean, the people that, the good news about America, you make fun of people like me that are CEOs. If there wasn't Dilbert, there'd be no humility, right, in the C-suite, which I think is great. But the reality is the standard of living in the United States has gone down for the average American over the last 20 years in terms of their earning powers moving forward. How do we change that? Number 1 is clearly education. Fortunately, we have the highest percent of population of people that have college degrees. But anyone, and again, I come from a state right now, California, that is completely dysfunctional, that the K through 12 is a mess, and in fact, not having an education system that gives our next generation the tools to compete is going to in fact have a huge negative effect on the country. The second one's about innovation. We all talk about innovation. I'm going to talk that, but it is about differentiation, value creation through innovation is the only way. And the good news, and I have an ultimate faith in the U.S., our ability to reinvent ourselves. We're in the process of reinventing ourselves after the financial crisis. The good news is that people, in fact, given the, we need the capital, but given the focus to be able to reinvent themselves can. And needless to say, being a capitalist, I think capitalism works. I really do believe that a country that is able to recreate itself will, in fact, be able to compete against what will be economic powerhouses coming out of Asia. So in terms of education, this has been just, for myself personally, it's been an absolute passion. 100% of our investment in terms of donations to communities, our focus in communities around the world is in the education area. We've created an after-science program. We've created programs to get kids excited about the environment. And quite honestly, and if there are any educators in here, to me the answer is in testing kids. That's easy to test. I lived in Singapore. Fine, test everybody and get a good test score. The issue is, how do you get kids excited about science? How do you get kids excited about mathematics? How do you get kids excited about anything other than listening to an iPod? And to be able to really have the excitement for a lifetime of learning. You know, I look back at my 34 years at HP and Agilent, the thought that I would be here as CEO is pure luck. If the company didn't split, I wouldn't be here. But here, I started leaving UC Davis, was going to be an environmentalist, went into electronics, and now I'm back trying to make a life science company. This is an absolute lifetime of learning, and creating that curiosity, I think, is really, really key. I don't know if any of you have been to the International Science and Engineering Fair. Intel actually is the main sponsor, and we co-sponsor this. It is just breathtaking what the top kids in this country are doing in terms of their innovation. And it's such a pleasure to meet these kids and to be able to reward them for just some really fascinating contributions. And of course, on the university side, we have supported 102 universities, 65 universities directly. Very, very strong collaboration because, again, I can talk about education, but we need to put our skin in the game and put in the millions of dollars that we do, both in the K through 12 as well as in the university system, to make sure that we can, in fact, continue where we are, because the good news is we have the best universities in the world, bar none. People try to copy us. They don't know how in reality, or they're not able to for a bunch of political reasons or historical reasons. And it really is a real treasure that we need as a company to continue to be able to support and donate to. Innovation is another area, and I always have this slide, and I always ask this question. Does anybody know who invented the optical mouse? No one knows. See, I was on the West Coast, they'd all say Xerox PARC. But I'll give you a hint, because I wouldn't have shown it. It's Agilent, right? And I'll never forget, this is right at the split of HP, something simple. And I'll never forget, an individual came up to me and said, Bill, we got a great idea. You know, we got these digital cameras starting to come out, and guy, I can take a picture of the top of this table and I can calculate the position of where the sensor is. We can put it into an optical mouse, change the way optical mouses are, change the way gaming is done because of the responsiveness and all the rest. And I'll never forget, I call up the PC part of HP and I said, we got this great invention. And they said to me, and this is just so simple, right? I mean, optical mouse, it's a dinky little contribution. But they said, well, we have a trackball. Remember all the trackballs? That costs $2.50. Hey, Bill, if you sell me this for $2.50, we'd be interested. And I said, well, hey, I just spent all this money in R&D. I was the general manager at the time. I said, we spent all this money in R&D. There's no way I'm giving it to you for $2.50. The good news in HP, and it still is in Agilent, if you can't cut a deal internally, go somewhere else. So we went to Microsoft. Any of you remember when Bill Gates introduced the world's first optical mouse? It was it was huge. It was taller than he was. Microsoft. And you think of them. Do you think they make optical mouse? They introduced the world's first optical mouse as an aftermarket sale for how much money? $75. At the heart of it, and it's such a simple example, is how do you create an environment in companies, how do you create an environment in universities that encourages the ability for people to innovate? And that's the strength. And again, I still come from, I believe, the technology capital of the world. We continue to still put the most money into venture funds, but this environment to take great ideas with the right alignment of resources and to empower people to be able to execute has been our strength. It's been the strength of the company for decades and decades, and really the strength of the U.S. And this whole idea of failure. I share this story. My first R&D project, when I was an R&D manager for years, failed. Cost Hewlett-Packard $20 million in my failure. But I learned a lot, and I'll tell you, it really didn't impact my career very much, right? I mean, $20 million failure. I don't know if they ever said, don't do it again, other than, what did you learn? But nonetheless, you learn so much through that process, and that's another very strong point of the U.S. where failure, especially in Silicon Valley, is a badge of honor because you learn something moving forward. It's a huge differential. And finally, talk a little about value creation. And this is we've honed over the years and something that we actually do our own executive training inside the company. And when you look at it, what really differentiates companies moving forward? And this is the part that, and I'm so happy talking to the dean and what you're trying to do here, is that at the end of the day, it's about people. 50% of your probability of success is the team that you put together and the team that you resource and empower. And of course, it's fun. You can go to Wall Street and everybody wants to see the spreadsheets. Everybody wants to see how much money you're going to make next quarter. Fine. You know, we clearly have an obligation to our shareholders. But ultimately, the success of companies are employees working with customers, creating great products and services, and that can never be lost. And so in our effort of hiring the best, training the best, and again, we spend millions of dollars internally every year for training to understand, to give them the tools for communication. I can get a team from China, Germany, the United States, put them in a conference room in 10 minutes after they introduce themselves. They're working on a common goal, common issue, common customer opportunity moving forward. The second part of it is the other 25% is the markets. And there's a famous quote from Bill Hewlett that said, never try to take a fortified hill. And I can't tell you, you go to business school, of how many companies have failed to do that. And you know, we're very fortunate. Apple is right down the street from us. It's less than a mile. Probably the most innovative company in the world, without doubt, or clearly from a technology standpoint. And you would ever think that going into being a last entrant into cellular phones, how would you do that? 85% of the phones are made by 5 manufacturers. Needless to say, having a different experience, different innovation, different focus completely changes the dynamics of the market. It wasn't a frontal attack to be a low-cost manufacturer against Nokia, because Nokia has been the most efficient manufacturer. It was about market understanding, product differentiation. There was a study done, I'll never forget this, in the 80s, and Hewlett-Packard did a study. What is the #1 thing that differentiated innovative companies? And Sony at that time was in its heyday. You had the companies in Europe, companies in America. The biggest one is that people who understood the markets, the marketeers, the R&Ds, and sort of the people I always joke and see around corners, were empowered to make the decision to invest money. It wasn't this hierarchical process that I said. I'll give you a hint. When I'm in corporate, all I hear is, you tend to hear good news. And to have a process that goes bottom up through layers of management to decide what to do always fails. And I go back to the simple example of an optical mouse. I'll never forget this individual. This engineer came to me and basically told me, HP managers are idiots. Bill, you're my last hope. Will you invest in me? It's basically the story. They're a lot more polite than that because we would never call anybody a name. But nonetheless, that was basically the message. And that individual had the vision, was able to go through the organization and be empowered to, in fact, make that decision. Technology is another one. This is very, in Cycrosen, I remember I do this in talks, about 50% of R&D is wasted. We always talk about marketing. 50% of marketing is wasted. You just don't know what half. In this particular side, this whole area in technology, and this is what we as a company need to do, is how do you differentiate yourself? The data is overwhelming. When you compete in a circle, and I'll use Jeffrey Moore, again, wrote Crossing the Chasm, you know, you talk the circle you compete, and you go in there and your new product is a little bit better than that guy's, and next week his product's a little bit better than you. Changing market share, changing the dynamics of the profit pool is very, very hard. You've got to be able to make change. And I'll give you an example on microarrays. I didn't talk about it. Microarrays, basically a little slide that you saw in chemistry school, and we can write down 1 million samples of DNA, and you can do analysis of, your genetic code. We were second to market to Affymetrix, and Affymetrix at that time was the leader. We were second. All of our technology people told me, Bill, we're better than Affy. The world just doesn't know that. And I go, well, the world doesn't know that. It doesn't help us. Because all I know is we're losing $30 to $40 million a year, and you're telling me we're better, but the customer doesn't say that. So I'll tell you what, why don't you go do something different that no one else can do? If not, we'll just shut everything down. That was a little bit of motivation for the team, right? Because we're going to shut everything down. But on the other hand, I said, is there something that you can do that no one else can do? And they said, well, we can do array CGH. It's a comparative analysis of chromosomes. So I said, sounds good. Go do that. So what happens? We make 20% operating profit or double-digit profit. Our business has been growing 20% every month, and we're not competing head-on. Go back to our founders' comments. We're not heading on. We're doing something different that's differentiable than from somebody else. And oftentimes it is as simple as that. And finally is the operating model of context. And I think this is where a lot of companies get into trouble. What is the operating model? We are a technology company that provides high quality, great service, but we're not the cheapest guy. And so you have this debate and say, well, are you going to be a low-cost supplier but yet provide the best customer satisfaction? We're going to be able to have post-sales support all the time, but we're going to make sure that our gross margins are only 20%. Guess what? Doesn't work. You can't do that. And there's another famous quote from our other founder, David Packard, more companies died from indigestion from starvation. The issue oftentimes is not that there aren't enough ideas, there are too many ideas, and in fact what we need to do is to be able to focus on your core competence, your team, the markets, and your core technology, and those are the companies that in fact I would submit last the test of time. And all of you have seen the top Fortune 500 this year versus 25 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and there are lots of companies that don't make it. And I would submit is they lose their way in terms of their operating model and the context of how they make decisions. Thank you very much.